Welcome to Advocacy Talks, a podcast from the advocacy team at Vision Ireland. Here's what's coming up on this episode.
Loneliness and isolation is really, I have to say, in the years I've been here and in the years I've worked with this whole community, loneliness and isolation keeps coming up to the top. It exists as a problem within the country, but for the individuals that we're supporting here as well, loneliness and isolation really features quite heavily.
And now, here's Madeleine McNamara.
Hello everybody, Madeleine here, and thank you so much for joining me today on Vision Ireland's Advocacy Talks. In our last month's episode, I was delighted to speak to Maeve Keneally, who is a young Irish dancer, amazing Irish dancer, who also just happens to have lost her sight at the age of 15, as well as being diagnosed with autism. It was a fascinating conversation, so do listen back to that if you happen to miss it on any of your favourite podcast platforms. Today, we're talking about mental health because this week, the 19th to the 25th of May, is European Mental Health Week. So to help me discuss this really important topic is Peter O'Toole, who is Vision Ireland's Head of Counselling, Wellbeing and Emotional Support. So Peter, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Madeleine. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, I know. Great to have you on the show today. So I think really to kick it off, it would be great to just talk about what is European Mental Health Week.
Yeah, European Mental Health Week, it's a long-standing global tradition at this stage, so always held in May, and I think this is the 6th year in 2025. So essentially it's a chance for everybody, within the European context to talk and exchange ideas about all aspects of mental health, and we're really underpinning that, highlighting the need for action, the need for reform, the need for change. So this year's theme, there's a different theme every year, is mental health as a social right, which really focuses on the links between mental health and social policies. So the main aim, I believe, of this particular theme this year is to encourage policymakers and people in specific positions of power to think a little bit bigger than the narrative that's been in place for many a decade now, which is very much a biomedical narrative, which tends to focus very much on the individual and an illness-based model. So this year we're looking for a little bit of a shift towards tackling the root causes of poor mental health, which can affect any person at any time.
So as you say, rather than just thinking of it as an individual who just for one reason or another, whether it be, you might think it might be in families or whatever, that's the reason solely for their mental health, thinking of it more on a societal level, that it's the way that society is constructed maybe that has an impact, sort of things like housing and, homelessness, or what kind of other things would kind of come under that, do you think, that would affect mental health for people in general?
Well, I think more and more people are coupling onto the fact that mental health doesn't exist. Poor mental health, good mental health, it doesn't exist in isolation. It is shaped by social conditions such as poverty, inequality, education, employment, all the other factors of life that add up to me and you and everybody, being this one complete person. And I think trying to portray mental health as solely an individual matter or as solely being about biology or a medical model or how the brain works doesn't always lead to lasting solutions as well. And I think that's the main theme and impetus of this particular European Mental Health Week as well. It's to look a little bit beyond, look at mental health as a issue that affects us all, but has its solutions hopefully grounded in community life, in policymakers and the avenues of power as well, that it's not just everybody's individual, it's everybody's individual right, but not necessarily within everybody's individual capacity to solve all of the issues that might have led to poor mental health in the first place.
And I think it's really interesting because this really feeds into very much the work that we do here in Vision Ireland Advocacy, in the sense that
much.
We are pushing governments and other bodies to improve various things in society for people who are blind or vision impaired, in terms of whether that be access to services like transport or health or education, employment. I think that those are huge, aren't they, things that for anybody having limited access to those things would affect your mental health, but they're particularly, I guess, relevant for people who are blind or vision impaired.
Exactly. I mean, there's a range of, different professionals within Vision Ireland who may assist on, different spectrums of need with people at any given time, from mobility to technology to finding a job. And then it's when we moved into, say, like our environments like advocacy and mental health. But everything you've mentioned there are aspects, and we may speak about this a little bit more, in a while, the type of issues that we find ourselves, within the work I'm responsible for here, and my colleagues and my teammates, in a mental health perspective, the real impact of the lack of access to everyday resources, which a lot of people can take for granted. And I think that's at the core of unpacking the idea of mental health as an actual social right in itself. I mean, a social right really means access to services, support, and protection that isn't actually based on just location or based on privilege or class or wealth. It's something that the state has to ensure for everyone. And Ireland, like a lot of other countries, we have ratified international human rights treaties, including the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which recognizes itself as the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest possible standard of physical and mental health, and not to separate the two of them. But as we know, unfortunately, mental health services in Ireland have been underfunded for a long time, very inconsistent, dependent on geography, and difficult to access. So when we look at treating mental health as a social right, it really challenges us to see it not solely as linked to a charitable endeavor, or a particular, bonus to policies and procedures that already exist, but it is actually, in fact, an obligation that the state has to its people as ratified by law, which again moves us maybe more into the advocacy and social rights aspect, that you'd be more familiar with yourself.
Yeah, and I guess it's, the fact that these legislations and things are there, it doesn't necessarily mean that it follows through on the ground, and I guess our role is to try and ensure that these things are, put into practice. And I guess I'm just thinking, particularly about for our service users who are blind or vision impaired, access to these things for the general public is, challenging in many ways, but they are particularly for people with sight loss. Whether it be, you mentioned there about, social and sporting events, and one of the key things is trying to get to them. How do you access that with a sight loss if you're living where there's no transport? So that, I guess that feeds then into heightening that level of sort of sense of isolation, which is so detrimental.
Yeah, and I think, it's always, difficulties in, any nation's procedures and policies and so on and so forth. They're not overcome, in 24 hours, or just in the space of a week. But we would always try and come up with a solution around that as well. But in the context of disability, full stop in Ireland, again, you have to remember, and I'm, quoting another law here, is that Ireland is a signatory to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And, mental health as a human right is essential, to well-being as well. But as you said yourself, there are a lot of maybe additional considerations that maybe a lot of people wouldn't think about. In terms of information accessibility, mental health websites, leaflets, referral forms often be lacking, say, screen reader compatibility or, braille alternatives. A lot of the time, maybe the crisis hotlines that are available for a lot of these, very worthwhile organizations out there who provide a range of mental health supports, not just for vision impairment or those living with any degree of sight loss, might not have set themselves up in a way that considers, those with a visual impairment as well. And as you said, with physical accessibility and transport, getting out to specific clinics and services may be completely impossible for a lot of people as well. Number of digital barriers, and also, I suppose, the stigma and invisibility in terms of a lot of the people that we're supporting feel that they can be dismissed or overlooked in a mental health consultation, and the focus might often just stay on the physical disability only and not focus on the mental or the emotional health side of things as well. A tendency to separate the two.
In terms of seeing them, it just is rather than seeing that the sight loss might have an impact, or just seeing it as a sight loss?
I think the difficulty can exist when the sight loss is just seen as the main source of an impact. For any person who has an additional challenge as well. That additional challenge, be it a sensory or a physical disability as well, doesn't exist in solely in a vacuum. Every one of us is put together, in terms of our own internal strengths and resources, the people that we have around us, the job that we have, the money that we earn, our access, as you said, to services, our access to transport as well. It can be very, very easy to say, well, that individual is just feeling depressed or anxious, but that is just, because of a physical sensory disability as well. But everybody is a lot more complicated than that at the end of the day. And I think this is something that we really have to always drive home, that the conditions that exist in people's individual day-to-day lives are very, very important and add up to better mental health when a lot of the other physical and basic social rights are being looked after or not being withheld or aren't inaccessible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But and just to touch a little bit on what we do provide in Vision Ireland in terms of, as I said, you're the head of the counselling, wellbeing and emotional support. Good long title there.
Yeah, maybe too long.
So, just to kind of, I guess let people know what services we do provide, I think would be useful.
Yeah, we have, I suppose, maybe three core strands to what we do here as well. And we work in very, very close collaboration with all of our colleagues, throughout the organisation in Vision Ireland as well. But when our core service is our actual counselling service, is primarily delivered by phone, which is in a direct response to the modality of counselling that our service users look for. So there is less of a concern about travelling and it being geographically based, as it might have been for a lot of similar organisations in the past, might have existed in Dublin and Cork only as well. So we deliver that by telephone as well. We're probably 25% busier this year than we were last year as well. But that gives an individual a space on a one-on-one basis to have the time, on a weekly basis to talk with a trained counsellor. And all of our counsellors will have received specific training in counselling for sight loss and vision impairment as well. So that is, I suppose, an extra strand of expertise that all of the people on our team have. That's backed up by another service called Connection Network, which is, I suppose, in a sense, a sister service. And that's a befriending service that we have. Very lucky to have a dedicated team of volunteers. And some individuals might not want the depth of engagement, maybe with a counsellor or a therapist, but we will arrange to pair them with a volunteer and just a weekly conversation or every 2 weeks for a bit of chat, common interests as well. And that in itself is an exceptionally sought after service.
Can I imagine that's kind of tackling that whole sort of maybe loneliness and isolation side of it?
Yeah, loneliness and isolation is really, I have to say, in the years I've been here and in the years I've worked with this whole community, loneliness and isolation keeps coming up to the top. It exists as a problem within the country and it exists as a problem within Ireland. And it's, and our overall mental health as a whole as well. But for the individuals that we're supporting here as well, loneliness and isolation really features quite heavily. So we're very, very lucky to have that core bunch of volunteers. We never have enough, to match the demand. And the third strand, I suppose, to what we do is to try and provide options for social engagement and peer support. So a lot of our peer support groups, of course, are online. They all developed as with many charities and NGOs, over the COVID period. And that was great. That's helped us to keep people connected, maybe with similar interests through a book club or, weekly coffee morning. We have Thursday Talk every Thursday. We've been going for years now at this stage as well. But often people, from Donegal down to Kerry to the Midlands to Dublin, the borders, opportunities to talk, on, and a lot of the time in a light-hearted way, about what's going on in their lives, to share ideas and so on. We have a few face-to-face peer support options and a number of other, projects. So, for example, we're starting our Nature Connection sessions again for the summer, starting this Friday, the 16th, actually. Yeah,
I know. I took part in one.
Yeah,
I think, was it last year?
It was last year.
It was a lifetime ago, but I think it was last year.
It was later on in the year. It was July as well. We learned our lesson last year to only do it May, June, July, August, April, and September, October are a little bit less reliable. We don't get the numbers.
Yes, I think I kind of came. It was a bit of a mixed day. It was a bit wet. We were under the trees, so we weren't getting actively rained on the whole time. But
It was the wettest one we had, but it was actually in July.
typical when I went.
I
Oh,
know.
honestly. Yes,
So
you could organise better weather if I come again next time.
we'll
Okay.
try our best.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, and additional projects like that are really, really worthwhile in the sense, that as an idea, getting outdoors and nature connection as well. It's probably been embraced, in a lot of other countries, a little bit better than here, but the connection between getting outdoors and the impact that nature and green spaces can have on individuals' mental health was a fairly new, radical idea when we introduced it 2 years ago. Nowadays, we're getting quite high numbers coming to it as well. And again, it's the type of thing that maybe people would have suggested, oh, you'll never get that done, or there won't be a demand for it. But like any service or any social or community engagement as well, there's as high a demand for anything that we do here with the people that we support as there is anywhere else. And I think that's really, if the truth be told, maybe it's what I've learned the most in this role as well. I remember, if I was to rewind it back, 4 or 5 years ago, one of the questions a lot of people would ask, especially from the counselling perspective, what do you find are what are the top 5 needs of people, living, without sight or with any vision impairment? What are the top 5 needs? What do they need? And the answer to that question is the same as every one of us needs, is a sense of community, a sense of belonging, access to basic human rights as well, enjoyment, fun, employment, friendship, love, work as well. And that's really, I suppose, been I think, a big learning curve for any of us, specifically maybe on my own team, and something hopefully that we can impart through to our colleagues there as well, is that there's always more options to be considered. There's always an idea that maybe one of our service users or clients will recommend through to us. I mean, there's something that's been thrown out in the air just last week from a social perspective of blind darts.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's only an idea at the start, but as as the Nature Connection series was only an idea at the start as well. And we've golf and tennis. We've a range of sports, Revision Sports Ireland as well. So maybe that's the next thing we'll look at. I mean, again, who can tell?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so many things available there now, aren't there, in terms of, Vision Sports, I guess, in terms of that leisure and sports, they're kind of ticking the boxes there, aren't they, in terms of those things, which is fantastic to have going on in Vision Island. We really are delighted with that. So I'm just thinking, so what would you say the common themes that you kind of come across in terms of the counselling that you're doing at the moment?
I mean, I think, we'd always like to harken back to the research that has existed, not so much in this country, but around Europe, about the common mental health difficulties or issues the blind and vision impaired people face. There is a 2 to 3 times more of a likelihood of depression and anxiety, a considerably higher suicide rate than in the general population as well. Knowing that, and knowing what we know through research as well, I would have to say that, again, loneliness and isolation features very, very highly, very, very high rates of anxiety coming through as well. So we would always chart that fear, ongoing maybe fear of fully engaging with life, seems to be very present in a lot of people we speak to.
Well, I can understand that because, you're dealing, particularly, I suppose, with people who have experiencing sight loss. So maybe who weren't born with the vision impairment, but have acquired it in later life, and the anxieties around that, I can imagine, must be huge. Being a person myself who's been vision impaired since birth, I don't have that same level. Of course, there are still anxieties. It's not to say that people who were born with a condition don't have some of, those same things as well, but it's, I guess, more acute in terms of somebody that's just experienced that sight loss. I mean, the fear of being able to get out and about and do things, I imagine, must be quite
Yeah, and anxiety. I mean, anxiety is probably the most predominant mental health issue that that I think anybody around the world is
Mm,
dealing with as well. But when there are additional challenges, and that anybody faces, especially with any level of a sensory disability, like blindness, vision impairments, sight loss as well, that anxiety can be very, very much heightened because it does, in a lot of instances, we find detract from overall confidence levels as well, which of course took a hell of a battering during the years of COVID as well. And one thing
mm,
we hear an awful lot from those we're supporting is, whilst everybody's, a lot of people will sit around the table and go, "Oh, remember COVID?" And sure, thank
mm.
God it's not in COVID anymore.
Yeah.
We would find even in general group conversations, a lot of people, a lot of individuals we're supporting still don't feel that it has ever really finished. The full levels of confidence in walking certain routes, in
Mm.
getting out there socially, maybe looking for work it's a longer pause.
Well, I think it's interesting because in my family, certainly COVID wasn't such a big difference.
Yeah,
And I think that's the thing, because I think in many ways people with sight loss are living in a COVID world all the time.
yeah,
So for other people who suddenly lost that freedom to go and do and be everywhere, it was a huge challenge for people. Whereas in my family, it was actually, I have to be very careful here because I understand that COVID for a lot of people was very bad, and
yes,
obviously sensitivity to losses that people
hmm,
suffered. But in my family, it was a time we were very lucky, and it kind of brought us together as a family. We were
yeah,
all together and couldn't go anywhere, and we actually kind of reconnected.
yeah,
And we didn't sort of suffer, obviously the non-sighted of us didn't suffer that loss of getting out and about. We actually gained in
yeah.
some ways because we had everyone there, whereas they would have been going off and doing.
But I think, as so often in this country as well, I mean, geographical location can make a really, really big difference, as well. And having access, say, to transport, even when, if we remember the time when we opened it from 2 kilometers to 5 and then
Mm,
travel within the county as well, for a lot of individuals, around the country, those we support, and in general, it would feel, that there might be one bus, that goes once a day into the town,
mm,
and the isolation is a predominant factor, that really impacts on mental health, full stop. And I think, the third one that comes after loneliness and anxiety will always find this is disempowerment, a feeling of disempowerment, or whether it's what somebody feels, or something that they have nearly had in a sense drilled into them, is not having the full level of autonomy, or power to
mm,
affect the changes that they need. And that's where, I suppose, mental health as a social right really plays in again as well. So not having, not being empowered to access a full range of services, or a full range of transport, or
mm,
financial issues, or the guidance maybe needed in order to tackle those specific other social issues as well. When that's an added on challenge as well, I think it's something that we have to take into account as well. Again, that mental health, good or bad mental health, or poor mental health, doesn't exist in isolation. And despite the fact that we're here and we're available to provide, say, counselling support on a one-on-one basis, that's great. But that is just 1 hour a week,
mm,
and there are a lot of other hours in any given week for any person, where those day-to-day living conditions and access to everything that's needed to live a fulfilled and a happy and healthy physical and emotional life as well might not necessarily be very, very strong in those hours outside of the therapy itself. So we really like to think of everything. And I think within this organization, we're very, very good at collaborating with each other, from the technology to the advocacy to the mobility to the
to the
emotional mental
sport
health side of things
and
as well.
whatever, all of those things, which, yeah, it's so important to get that rounded.
Yeah.
There are lots of other things available that people, you know, can be accessing in order to fill some of those hours,
Yeah.
and transitioning back into employment, those services as well, giving that people that sort of giving them their life back if that's what they want in order to get that level of independence back. Do you think that the general public really have an awareness of, you know, I guess I mean I think awareness of what it's like to be vision impaired, and in terms of the impact it has on people.
I, I think it will, it will depend. I mean, I think it's, hopefully getting better. hopefully getting better through social media channels, podcasts, and so on and so forth as well. But I still, in any given week with the individuals I might speak to myself, I think there is still very much a feeling that no, it's not understood. But in saying that again, people, it's not always a lack of interest in understanding. So say if I take this profession, for example. So as I said earlier, just myself and the counsellors that we work with on the team, they're all specifically trained in counselling, for sight loss as well. And that is a specific area of expertise. And there's not a huge amount of us, who have received that training. But even in the wider population of mental health professionals, and it will be my experience, and I think most would agree, that there might be a reluctance for other counsellors or psychologists or mental health professionals to engage with a client who has that specific, sensory disability. And it's not through a lack of understanding, but it's through a fear of potentially saying the wrong thing or not being good enough as well. So, what we'd really, really like is to see more professionals engage with us and say, look, this is a gap in our community health centre or in our organisation, even if they're specialised in something completely separate, maybe like addiction or past abuse and trauma as well, is that, we're here and available even to signpost people in the right direction. And with the best will in the world, we have our capacities here and we're here to support people with their mental health. But we would also like people to have the full autonomy to be empowered to seek that help in their local community, if that's what they wanted to do, or if they felt that was a better choice for them as well. And it really just navigates itself down to loss, when we're talking about specific losses here. We're talking about sight loss, in some instances, or the other losses that, accompany that loss of independence or self-confidence, in some cases. And at the heart of, I suppose, of every mental healthcare professional's training is to understand and appreciate the impact that loss has on us all. We specialize maybe in a little separate section as well. So we really like to encourage people and policymakers, if they want to know more about that side of things to make contact.
Get in touch with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that brings us nicely to, to say that obviously I'm aware that, this chat we've had today may kind of bring up issues for people who are listening. And if they haven't already kind of reached out to your service, what's the best way to do that?
Well, we would say, and anybody who has an involvement with Vision Ireland to always speak about access to the emotional and mental health services through their own community resource worker, or also to call our own info line, which we hopefully provide there at the end too as well. So, and again, we're happy, if a referral is made through to us to discuss the options, just because you might decide to ask, how does our counselling service work once you're referred through to us as well? We'll have a general conversation about what your needs are as well. And if it's the case that what we're providing is matching those needs, we'll go ahead. And if not, we'll do our absolute best to endeavour to find or signpost to maybe other organisations or other resources, or maybe it could be peer support or just joining our coffee morning online on Thursday. That could be exactly what somebody needs, So we're happy to take any inquiries from anybody.
Oh, fantastic! That's really, really helpful. And thank you so much, Peter, for joining me today. Well, that's the end for us today, and thank you so much to everyone for listening. If you do need any, services or support from Vision Ireland, you can always log on to our website, which is www.vi.ie, or you can call our info line on 1800 911 250. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Advocacy Talks. To get in touch with our advocacy team, send us an email to campaigns@vi.ie, or why not join one of our local advocacy networks, where you can work together with others to solve some of the biggest problems facing blind and partially sighted people in Ireland. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.